there is all this kind of life triggering moment. So unless you have been through that, most people don't think about what happens if kind of situation. So I think the knowledge gap for that is the biggest problem that we're facing. For example, if you look on our website, we have a lot of like videos, cartoon videos. The idea is that we don't want to make this whole last mile life topic morbid.
You spoke about transparency as well. Are there any friction, right, or any challenges you face, doing that? For example, there might be some industry standards that they don't want to kind of put out their price out there and all that.
So, I mean, the whole idea of transparency doesn't really exist as much. Okay, well, they want to be transparent in terms of being seen out there, but at the same time, they want to kind of like keep their margins. I mean, for every business, it's the same, right? The more transparent you are in pricing, people will compare. And then if you are not as competitive in terms of pricing, people will not come to you. And it's kind of like the biggest fear that I guess the legal industry or any like OPEC industry has is that it will be a competition to the bottom. Because if it's a commoditized product, meaning it's the same standardized product throughout, people will be competing for the lowest price, and basically you're competing downwards. Because at the end of the day, for our users, right, if you can compare, you always go for the cheapest if everything else is the same. Which is why, for example, for the pricing, we don't just give a number, we give you what's included the pricing. So, for example, this is the one way I help to convince lawyers to kind of be on board platform. What you're providing is advice. It's not a commoditized product. You're spending time to help people think through their personal situation. It's a bit different from, say, an online will, where if everything else is the same, you're kind of comparing on, the same stuff. So, so I guess some lawyers, for example, are receptive to the idea, yes, I'm providing a differentiated product. So some lawyers, of course, what we feel is that basically because their products are a bit more commoditized, it's more like a factory process that they have. That's why they don't want to be transparent, because then it's really a price competition. And for any business, what you don't want is, if you sell a commoditized product, is that you don't want price competition. So that's the give and take, right? So in a way, I mean, for any startup, you want the path of least friction. So we tend to go to law firms that feel that they have a differentiating factor, that we also feel they have a differentiating factor. So it's easier for us to kind of like market them or actually put them on a platform or differentiate them.
Nice, cool. Yeah, so interesting. Thanks for sharing. So those are on the provider side, right? So do you face any challenges on the consumer side, right? Those people browsing, those people looking for to compare providers and all that.
Right. So I guess it's not like, for example, so when we created Immortalize at the very beginning, we kind of model it over Expedia, hotels.com, this sort of marketplaces, because we felt that people are familiar using this kind of marketplaces. So if we create something similar, they may be familiar with it. But I was so wrong. so wrong on that. So what we realized is that, for example, your marketplace, your hotels.com, you know exactly what you're looking for. You know where you're going. You have experience kind of, what you want. Okay. But for last mile of life services, you ask people, what's inside a will? Why do you need a will? What is a lasting power attorney? And all, what does it entail in a probate? Most people will have zero idea. In fact, how to do legacy planning, estate planning, most people have zero ideas in it. In fact, what we realize is that, for example, the insurance industry is a lot of agents. So they kind of, these days they are called financial consultants, but in any case, the agent kind of model. The reason why there's so many agents is because people need to be handheld through the process of their estate planning. So that's kind of what we face, the biggest problem we face. But I guess, for most people who have been through the death process, so to give you a very simple example, probate and administration. So basically when someone passes away, the family or kins or appointed executor needs to go to the court to get kind of a grant, whether grant of probate or grants of letters of administration. But in any case, probate process, most people, we did a very small sample survey. 100% of the people who have been through the process said they will pay someone else to do it. But, people who have never done it before or kind of know a little bit, they were like, oh, is it very hard kind of situation? So the knowledge gap here is really big in terms of what should you be doing to plan for, estate planning. Like, for example, people with kids, they do not know that they need to appoint guardians, because in case anything happens with the parents, your kids will be, who's going to take care of the kids? Is the family going to fight over the kids, or, all this kind of stuff? Like, what happens to the money? So most people don't know, for example, that, if your kid is under 18, they actually cannot take your CPF money. They have to wait until 18. So in the meantime, if you don't have any other assets, what are they going to live on? Kind of situation. There's a lot of this sort of consideration people don't know, don't think about until, someone actually gets into an accident. So we did a survey, for example, like most people who did their will, most people in the 30 plus who did their will is because they have kids, number one. And coincidentally, like we asked them, why did you do this? Why did you and your partner decide to do a will? And they said, oh, because we were in a flight or in a car. So in a flight, there was some turbulence, and they were thinking, oh no, what if both of us pass away? What's going to happen to our kids? So, there is all this kind of life triggering moment. So unless you have been through that, most people don't think about what happens if kind of situation. So I think the knowledge gap for that is the biggest problem that we're facing. Not just us, but any other providers of last mile life services. And that's one of the key things that Immortalize is trying to address. So, for example, if you look on our website, we have a lot of like videos, cartoon videos. The idea is that we don't want to make this whole last mile life topic morbid. It's actually, like, for example, someone's passing, it's like even a funeral, it's a celebration of someone's life instead of mourning for someone's death kind of situation. It's a change in kind of thinking. I mean, recently there was this one report out there that says that, more and more Gen Zs, so we actually wrote an article on it, more and more Gen Zs are actually thinking about funeral as celebration of life and not the traditional mourning of someone's death kind of stuff. So I guess that's exactly what we're trying to do, in a sense, appeal better to what kind of information can appeal better to the younger generation or older generation, or make this topic less taboo, less morbid. Eventually, it's just a fact of life.
Cool, nice. And I think you spoke a lot about educating consumers, right? I think something that reminds me of is like a plumbing service, right? I mean, I wouldn't ever think about that pipe bursting, right? I wouldn't ever think of preparing a list of what you call that, plumbers, right? I would prepare until the pipe is burst, until the water is flowing out the toilet. Then scramble, Google something, and that's where probably SEO comes in. And interesting. So what are your plans or what have you done in terms of educating, right? Above I love what you're doing on the cartoons, making it friendly, making it informal, right? So what are the other things that you're doing to educate consumers like me?
Right. So, putting articles out there or this kind of thing for any startup, that's kind of the basic, because it's SEO, right? But in any case, what we were trying to do more, it's collaborations. So, one example is collaboration with Property Guru. So why Property Guru? Because, so when we spoke to lawyers and everything and all this kind of stuff, basically we asked also the providers, not just lawyers, but other providers, at what point should we be entering? It doesn't make sense when you enter when someone is 18 years old, because that wouldn't be at the top of their mind. So, long story short, the idea is that basically we got some feedback. When someone buys a house, usually that's when they should or will start thinking about estate planning. Reason why? When you buy a house with your partner, for example, the first question is, do you go in joint tenancy or tenancy in common? What's the implication of all this? It really is because when, for example, if someone passes away, the kind of inheritance is different based on the two different structures. But we won't go through that. Read our article, but in any case, so that's one. Or when they buy a house, it's because they have it's their first house. So in their mind, for example, it's their first significant assets. It's probably most people's biggest purchase. Okay, or if they are trying to upgrade, sell their house, or to buy another house, is because they have kids, because then they need to kind of like, so at that point in time, they have the mental maturity or the kind of triggers to think about, how do I protect this asset? What happens if I pass away kind of situation? So that's why we did a collab with Property Guru. And right now, for example, we are doing things like digital assets. Digital assets for most people are becoming, so we are still working on the partner part, but in any case, the idea behind, so digital assets, basically most people are digital asset, cryptocurrency. So for example, if you buy a cryptocurrency in, say, a US-based exchange versus a Singapore-based exchange or UK-based exchange, will you be subjected to the inheritance tax there? Something along that line. All these things, do people know the answer? I think most people wouldn't. Kind of situation. So like, since you will buy in the Singapore exchange, because we don't have inheritance tax here yet. So that the thing here is that. But in any case, the idea is to be present when people are already present. They may not be present for estate planning purposes, but they're present for other reasons like property guru, property search. So I want to be present there when, because then in that way, I kind of insert the topic slowly to people and kind of integrate myself to where people are already there anyway. So I don't really want to go up to people's face and say, hey, think about that. It's a bit too in your face, but if I can basically use the topics that they already care about, for example, working with parents group, that could be something. Basically parents who are looking at, kids and stuff, then they should think about, how should I protect my child and all this kind of stuff in terms of sex. So those are the things that we try to look out for in terms of education. So instead of the direct, hey, which most law firms or companies, providers are doing, basically, hey, you should think about that because blah, blah, blah. It's too in your face and I will just reject it. Even for myself, I don't like it when people put it in my face. But if it's a topic that I care about and then you are inserting it, like, oh yeah, I didn't think about the relation to this. Yeah, then it's a lot more palatable. So that's kind of what we think and we are doing in terms of educating people. To be present where they are and then basically help them see the relation of what they care about and estate planning.
Well, I love what you're doing in terms of collaboration and partnerships with companies, right? I mean, it's natural, right? I mean, people don't really think about that when they buy property together as a married couple, right? Or investment purposes, right? So I think it's very natural. I think for Immortalize to really go in to educate these property buyers and investors, right?